What happens when a royal sits down for one of the most prestigious interviews in America, only to walk out in fury before the conversation can even reach its conclusion? Prince Harry's highly anticipated appearance on 60 Minutes with Anderson. Cooper was expected to be a defining media moment, one that could clarify, contextualize, and perhaps even soften the controversies that had surrounded him for years. Instead, it unfolded into a tense, emotionally charged exchange that would leave viewers stunned and questioning whether reconciliation between Prince Harry and the public was slipping further out of reach. The interview began with warmth and composure, the kind audiences have come to expect from 60 Minutes. The setting was calm, understated, and intimate. No dramatic lighting, no studio audience, no distractions. Just two chairs facing each other, a modest coffee table between them, and the unmistakable quiet that signals serious journalism. It was the kind of environment designed to disarm guests, encouraging honesty rather than performance. Every detail of the room conveyed professionalism and restraint. Reinforcing the gravity of the conversation about to unfold, Anderson Cooper greeted Prince Harry with a respectful smile, extending his hand in a gesture that balanced courtesy with journalistic neutrality. "Harry, thank you for being here," Cooper said, his voice calm and measured, carrying both hospitality and authority. Prince Harry nodded in response, his posture relaxed at first glance, but noticeably rigid beneath the surface. His shoulders were slightly tense, his movements controlled, as though he were carefully managing not just his words, but his emotions as well. "Well," Harry began, forcing a faint smile, "I suppose the world expects me to explain myself, so here I am." Anderson chuckled lightly, steering the moment back toward ease. "That's the beauty of conversations like this," he replied, signaling that the interview was meant to be open, fair, and thoughtful. For a brief moment, the exchange felt cordial, almost friendly, as if both men were aligned in their desire for clarity rather than confrontation. But as the interview progressed, the tone subtly began to shift. Anderson's questions, while respectful, grew deeper and more pointed. He asked about Harry's fractured relationship with the royal family, the accusations leveled against the British press, and the emotional toll of stepping away from royal duties. Each question was delivered without aggression, yet with unmistakable precision, the hallmark of a journalist who understands that truth often lies beneath discomfort. Prince Harry's responses initially remained controlled. He spoke about pain, betrayal, and the desire to protect his family, particularly his wife and children. His voice carried conviction, but there were cracks, brief pauses, tightened expressions, and moments where his gaze drifted away from Anderson, as though searching for composure. The calm that defined the opening minutes began to erode, placed by defensiveness and frustration, as Anderson pressed gently for clarification, asking whether Harry believed he bore any responsibility for the ongoing rift. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The silence between questions grew heavier. Harry's jaw tightened. His answers became shorter, more guarded, and noticeably less reflective. What had started as a conversation was slowly transforming into a collision between a seasoned journalist committed to accountability and a defiant royal struggling to maintain control of his narrative. "This isn't about blame," Anderson said calmly at one point. "It's about understanding." But to Harry, the question seemed to strike a nerve. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled sharply, and shook his head. "You don't understand," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "No one does." The emotional distance between interviewer and guest widened, and viewers could sense that the interview was veering toward a breaking point. The tension became unmistakable. Harry's composure faltered as he spoke about feeling cornered, misunderstood, and relentlessly scrutinized. His hands moved more animatedly now, his posture less controlled. Anderson, maintaining his professionalism, continued to listen carefully, but did not retreat from difficult questions. It was this balanced empathy without concession that appeared to frustrate Harry the most. Then came the moment that would define the interview. When Anderson asked whether Harry believed reconciliation with his family was still possible, the room fell silent. Harry stared at the floor, then looked up sharply. "I didn't come here to be interrogated," he said, firmly. The warmth that had opened the interview was gone entirely, replaced by palpable anger and emotional exhaustion. Without waiting for a response, Prince Harry stood up. The movement was sudden, decisive, and final. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor as the production crew froze, unsure whether the moment was part of the conversation or the end of it. "I'm done," Harry said, his voice tight with emotion. And just like that, he walked out of the interview. The camera lingered briefly on Anderson Cooper, remained seated, composed, but visibly surprised. It was a rare moment in television. Journalism a walkout not fueled by theatrics, but by unresolved tension and emotional strain. This was not just an interview gone wrong. It was a public unraveling, a stark reminder that behind royal titles and global attention lies a man still grappling with conflict, identity, and the weight of expectation. What was meant to be a moment of clarity became one of the most unforgettable walkouts in television history, leaving viewers to wonder whether Prince Harry's story was truly being told, or whether it was slipping further beyond his control. The studio lights were warm but unforgiving, casting a clean, deliberate glow across the minimalist set. The producers had promised Prince Harry a measured, respectful conversation, no ambushes, no tabloid theatrics. People get to hear directly from you, they had said. For Anderson Cooper, this was familiar territory. Controlled space designed to feel intimate while millions watched from afar. The first few minutes unfolded smoothly, almost predictably. Anderson began with neutral ground Harry's life in America, his charitable initiatives, the projects he had chosen since stepping away from royal duties. He asked about the transition from palace corridors to suburban streets, about the balance between public identity and private reinvention. Harry answered confidently, even comfortably, his posture relaxed, his tone assured. Yet beneath the surface, something sharper emerged. "America has been tolerable," Harry said, leaning back slightly, his mouth curling into a faint knowing smile. "At least here, I don't have to bow to outdated rituals or pretend my family understands me. It's liberating to finally live in a place where people treat me as special, not just a spare part of a system." The word spare lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Anderson adjusted in his chair, unfazed. He had interviewed presidents at war, generals under investigation, and celebrities unraveling under their own contradictions. Ego and resentment were familiar companions. Still, he leaned forward just enough to signal engagement rather than confrontation. "But isn't there also comfort in tradition?" Anderson asked evenly. "A sense of stability, perhaps? Something grounding?" Let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Comfort for whom?" he replied. "For the ones sitting on golden thrones? Tradition is just a cage with better wallpaper. My family clings to it because it hides the cracks. It gives the illusion of strength while everything underneath is quietly rotting." The tension in the room shifted almost imperceptibly. A producer glanced up from behind the cameras. Anderson noticed the flash of defiance in Harry's eyes, something raw, unresolved, but his own voice remained steady. "That's an interesting way of putting it," Anderson said. "And yet millions around the world still admire the monarchy. They see it as a symbol of unity, continuity, even resilience. What would you say to them?" Harry's response came quickly, dismissive, sharpened by conviction. "I'd say they're infatuated with a fairy tale. They don't see the machinery behind it, the manipulation, the silencing, the control. They celebrate the crown, but they don't care who bleeds for it. Not really." Anderson paused, allowing the words to settle. His journalist instincts were alert now. He recognized escalation when he heard it, the subtle shift from reflection to accusation. Still, his role was not to intervene but to illuminate. Truth, even when uncomfortable, was part of the job. He changed direction. "Gently, let's talk about family," Anderson said softly. "You've spoken before about Meghan and your children with a lot of emotion. How is life as a husband and a father away from the institution?" Harry's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he smiled, uncontrolled, practiced. "Life as a husband and father is exactly as it should be," he said. It's mine. And frankly, the press has no right to dissect it, nor does the monarchy. I protect what's mine. It's more than they ever did for me. Anderson nodded, acknowledging the sentiment, but he didn't let the underlying arrogance pass unnoticed. But when you speak publicly, he replied, through interviews, documentaries, or your book, you do open the door to questions. You ever feel there's a contradiction between demanding privacy and sharing intimate details on your own terms? For the first time, Harry's composure cracked. His eyes flickered with irritation, his fingers tightening against the armrest. That's a tired argument, he said sharply. Privacy doesn't mean silence. It means control. Decide what the world deserves to know, not the tabloids. Not palisades, not strangers with opinions. If people can't grasp that distinction, that's their failure, not mine. The studio fell into a brief, deliberate quiet. Anderson didn't rush to fill it. Silence, he knew, often spoke louder. Then follow-up questions. Harry shifted slightly, as if suddenly aware of how his words might sound beyond the studio walls. Anderson finally spoke, his tone still calm but probing. Control can be empowering, he said, but it can also isolate. Do you ever worry that in reclaiming your voice, you may be closing yourself off from reconciliation? Harry hesitated. Just for a moment. Then his expression hardened again. Reconciliation requires accountability, he said, and I've yet to see any from the people who demand it most from me. The cameras kept rolling. The conversation moved on, but the undercurrent remained resentment entwined with liberation, confidence shadowed by unresolved grief. For viewers at home, it would be another headline, another debate. For Anderson, it was a familiar reminder that even princes, when stripped of crowns and ceremony, wrestle with the same contradictions as anyone else, only under much brighter lights. Harry leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms tightly across his chest, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of resistance. His posture shifted from engaged to guarded, as though an invisible line had just been crossed. Selective? Said his voice edged with challenge. No, it's called freedom, something you as an American should understand better than most. The words didn't just land, they hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, like a gauntlet thrown at Anderson. Cooper's feet. The warmth that had characterized the opening moments of the interview evaporated almost instantly, replaced by an icy tension that seeped into every corner of the studio. Even the faint mechanical hum of the cameras seemed louder now, amplified. By the sudden stillness, Anderson gave a slow, thoughtful nod. He glanced down at his notepad and scribbled a brief line, more out of instinct than necessity. His face remained neutral, composed, the practiced calm of a man who had spent decades navigating volatile conversations. Inside, however, he knew something had shifted. This was no longer a reflective discussion or a carefully managed media appearance. This was a powder keg, and Harry, whether consciously or not, was holding the match. The stillness in the room was deceptive. The cameras continued to roll quietly, their red lights blinking without judgment. Crew members stood frozen in place, barely daring to breathe, as if any movement might fracture the fragile balance holding the moment together. At the center of it all sat two men, one seasoned in the discipline of journalism, trained to probe. Without provoking, the other simmering with defiance, carrying years of resentment, grief, and unresolved anger beneath a polished exterior. The tension had become visible now, almost physical, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer road. Anderson leaned forward slightly. His voice remained calm, measured, but the edge of his next question was sharpened with intent precise enough to pierce through. Harry's carefully maintained armor. You've spoken at length about your struggles with the institution. Anderson began evenly. The pressure, the control, the sense of being trapped. But I want to ask about something deeper. Harry's eyes narrowed just slightly, his gaze fixed on Anderson. Your mother, Anderson continued, Princess Diana became a global symbol not only because of her role, but because of how she connected with people, her empathy, her vulnerability, her willingness to challenge the system from within. Do you feel that you carry her legacy? For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Harry's lips pressed together into a thin, rigid line. The question had struck a nerve raw, exposed, unguarded. Gone was the confident cadence, the rehearsed certainty. When he spoke, his response came, fast and clipped, as though he were trying to outrun the emotion rising in his chest. Legacy is a word the media loves, he said coldly. You put my mother on pedestals, then you tore her down. You watched her suffer. You profited from her pana. Now you expect me to carry that weight as if it's a crown I should be grateful for? His jaw tightened. I am not my mother's replacement, he continued. And I won't let anyone use her name to measure me, define me, or guilt me into becoming something I never chose to be. The words carried more than anger. There was grief in them, fatigue, a quiet fury that had been building for years. Anderson listened carefully, nodding slowly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to soften the moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, respectful. That's fair, he said. And I understand the weight of that comparison. But many people see you as continuing her spirit, her independence, her willingness to question authority, to challenge tradition. Isn't that something you embrace? Harry let out a sharp scoff. He leaned back again, folding his arms tighter, his expression hardening. People love a narrative, he said. They want heroes and villains, echoes and replacements. It makes things neat, digestible. He shook his head. My mother didn't choose to be consumed by the system. She was trapped by it. I chose to leave. There's a difference. And pretending that our paths are the same just because it makes people feel nostalgic is lazy. The room felt heavier now, charged with unsaid things. Anderson held his gaze. But don't you think that, in stepping away so publicly, in speaking out, you're still engaging with that system? Still defining yourself in relation to it? Harry's eyes flashed. I'm defining myself away from it, he shot back. The institution wants silence. It survives on compliance. The moment you speak honestly, you're branded a problem. He paused, then added more quietly. My mother didn't have that choice. I do. The silence that followed was thick, almost oppressive. Somewhere off camera, a crew member shifted their weight. Anderson let the pause breathe, knowing its power. Some would argue. Anderson said carefully that by continuing to speak about the monarchy, you're keeping the conflict alive. That perhaps healing on both sides requires stepping back entirely. Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. Healing doesn't come from pretending nothing happened, he replied. It comes from truth. And if that makes people uncomfortable, maybe that discomfort is overdue. He leaned forward now, mirroring Anderson's earlier posture. For decades, the system decided who I was, what I felt, what I was allowed to say. I won't apologize for taking that control back. Anderson studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Control can be powerful, he said, but it can also be isolating. Harry didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted briefly away from the camera, just for a second. Before returning, isolation is better than suffocation, he said finally. The cameras kept rolling, for viewers watching from their living rooms. It would be another intense moment, another headline, another debate waiting to ignite. The studio, it was something else entirely, a collision of history. Identity and unresolved pain, unfolding in real time under the unforgiving glare of the lights. And neither man looked away. You all want to turn me into a symbol, Harry said, his voice tightening as he leaned forward slightly, because it makes for better headlines. It's cleaner that way, easier to sell. He shook his head, a flash of irritation crossing his face. I'm not here to be a candle in the wind for anyone's nostalgia, not a metaphor. I'm not a continuation of some unfinished story you all feel entitled to rewrite. His eyes locked onto Anderson's. My mother's memory belongs to me, to my family, not to the public. certainly not to journalists trying to spin another narrative. The words were sharp, almost accusatory, cutting through the studio air with precision.
Oh,
A faint ripple of unease passed through the room. Even the hum of the light seemed louder now, as though the set itself were reacting to the sudden chill. Anderson absorbed the outburst without flinching. Years of experience had trained him not to react defensively, not to escalate when emotions ran hot. He gave a small, measured nod. "All right," he said softly. "Then let's pivot." The shift in tone was deliberate, an attempt to lower the temperature without surrendering the integrity of the conversation. "You and Megan," Anderson continued, careful with his phrasing, "have spoken at length about the difficulties you've faced together. Some critics argue that your marriage pulled you further away from your family. How do you respond to that?" Harry's eyes flashed instantly, the irritation unmistakable. "Critics," he repeated. "You mean the same people who have never met her? The ones who sit behind desks, writing columns, pretending they understand what marriage means?" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Megan saved me from a suffocating institution," he said firmly. "She didn't pull me away. She freed me. Anyone who can't see that is either blind or willfully dishonest." The hostility in his voice was no longer subtle. It filled the room, pressing against the edges of Anderson's calm. Still, the journalist kept his voice even. "But when you describe her as saving you," Anderson asked, "doesn't that suggest that without her, you'd still be trapped? That she holds an almost singular power over your decisions?" Harry smirked, shaking his head slowly as though amused by the question. "Singular power?" "No," he replied. "That's not how real relationships work. It's called partnership. Something most journalists like you can't comprehend because you're too busy dissecting other people's lives instead of living your own." The sting was direct, personal, and unmistakable. For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Anderson didn't rise to it. He didn't snap back or bristle. Instead, he scribbled another note on his pad, the quiet scratch of pen against paper, a subtle act of defiance. Then he pivoted again. "You've also been open about raising your children in America," he said. "How is fatherhood different here than it might have been back in the UK?" Harry exhaled sharply, as though the question barely deserved the effort. "It's simple," he said. "Here, my children get to be normal." He leaned back, his tone firm, almost dismissive. "They're not props for photographers. They're not pawns in some royal chess game. And unlike back home, they have a father who actually protects them." Anderson tilted his head slightly. "So you don't believe your family would have protected them?" Harry let out a short, mocking breath. "Protected them?" he echoed. "The monarchy doesn't even protect its own heirs, let alone the so-called spare's children. My kids would have been sacrifices on the altar of tradition." His voice hardened. "That's not family. That's exploitation." Anderson sighed quietly, his patience tested but not broken. "Some might argue," he said carefully, "that by stepping into documentaries, books, and interviews like this one, you're also putting your children in the spotlight, just on your own terms. How do you reconcile that?" Harry leaned forward now, his eyes intense, his voice dropping into something colder, more resolute. "I don't need to reconcile anything," he said. "I decide what's best for my family. Not the media, not the crown, and certainly not people like you." The room chilled instantly. The shift was palpable. Anderson's jaw flexed slightly, but his tone remained calm, professional. "It seems that every question about accountability," he said, "you redirect back to control. Do you think there's room for balance?" Harry's smirk widened, almost smug. "Balance is a myth," he replied. "You either control your story or it controls you. I refuse to be a victim of narrative anymore." He leaned back, folding his arms. "That's something you'll never understand," he added, "because your entire career depends on poking at other people's lives." For the first time, Anderson's brow furrowed, the faintest crack in his composure. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to respond. He let the silence stretch, long and deliberate, watching Harry sit comfortably in it, almost enjoying the dominance of the moment. Finally, Anderson spoke. "Let's look ahead then," he said evenly. What do you see for yourself in the future? What does life look like for Prince Harry 10 years from now? Harry chuckled under his breath, but there was no warmth in it. The sound was condescending, dismissive. "The future," he said. "The future is mine." He looked directly into the camera now. "It's not something I need to lay out like a press release for public consumption." The cameras kept rolling, the lights burned steadily overhead, and in that moment, the interview was no longer about royalty, family, or tradition. It was about control, identity, and the cost of refusing to be defined by anyone else.